Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today we're discussing OKRs and how to use them for alignment and measurement of engineering team activities. If this is your first time at CTO Craft, let me tell you a little bit more about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community numbers are over 1,500 and provides one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, an online community, and events like this one. And a huge thanks to our headline partner, AWS, for helping us make these Bytes events possible. So as introductions, I'm Glyn Roberts. I'm emceeing this Bytes session, and I'm the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. With me today is Emanuele Blanco, CTO at Moneyfarm. So could you give us a short introduction about yourself, please, Emanuele?
Yeah, hi, my name is Emanuele. I'm working as CTO at Moneyfarm. I've been in the industry for like 12, 13 years. I started my career as a developer. And Moneyfarm is a digital wealth manager. So we help people managing their wealth. And I'm very excited to take part of this conversation.
Great to have you here. And also with us today is Kim Atherton, CEO and co-founder at Just Three Things. So welcome, Kim. Could you also give us a short intro?
Thanks, Glyn, and great to be here. So I'm the CEO and founder of Just Three Things, which is a OKR software provider. So we originally started out life as an internal tool for OVO Energy, which is a UK unicorn startup. I was the chief people officer, and I built Just Three Things to help to align and engage our cross-functional product teams using OKRs, and we spun out as a separate business 2 years ago.
Excellent. Great to have you here as well. So for the audience watching, there's an ask a question link just below the video. So feel free to ask your questions at any time. And if it's relevant to the conversation, I'll jump in with them straight away. If not, we'll get through the rest of them near the end of the event. So let's talk about OKRs and engineering. So let's start off with you, Emanuele. What is the purpose of OKRs and why should you use them?
Well, I think OKRs are a great tool, to be honest, in order to keep a focus on what you're doing, right? You know, as companies, especially, I've been working a lot with startups. It's very easy to get dragged and try to do so many different things at one time. And I think, you know, once you're trying to do many different things at one time, you fail to put the focus on the things that really matter. And I think OKR is a great framework that companies can use in order to make sure that, you know, we say, what are our objectives as company, what we want to achieve? Okay, that's great. And then when will we say we will achieve those objectives? What are the key results we can implement, we can achieve in order to achieve those objectives? And writing that in a format, in a one-pager, I think it's a great tool to actually making sure that you have a clear direction of travel that you can focus. And yeah, that's why I think it's, to be honest, it helps us a lot in order to understand what we need to direct our focus on.
Excellent. And Kim, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I completely agree. The reason that Just Three Things is called Just Three Things is because the practical experience of just asking both our leadership team and all of our other teams to prioritise three things on the idea that the number 4 doesn't get done. So I completely agree with Emanuele in terms of bringing that focus. I think the other real power of OKRs is thinking about outcomes rather versus output. So I think framing the key results as business outcomes and business value really helps to cement all of the great stuff that everyone does in tech and engineering of seeing features or tests as hypotheses. And distinguishing between those two, I think, is one of the really big, powerful things from OKRs. So what's the business outcome, and then what are the hypotheses that we think might achieve that business outcome?
Absolutely. So moving away from the outputs to the outcomes. So as we are touching on this, Kim, so what would you say are good OKRs as examples?
Sure. So I think I think there's probably a couple of things. So first of all, the title of the objective. It sounds really straightforward, but I'm always surprised at how many of my clients don't think about the fact that other departments or other teams or other stakeholders need to actually understand what the objective is. So using really simple, engaging language, really telling people about the why. Why are we trying to achieve this? And then key results, I typically recommend about 3 to 4, and say, look, they should be outcomes. So we really encourage people to set metric outcome key results rather than milestones, because I think, again, milestones, you can fall into the trap of setting a big kind of list of deliverables and saying, when we deliver this feature and this project, ta-da, we're going to achieve our objective. So actually setting them as metric outcomes is really useful. And then really thinking about, are these leading or lagging indicators? Do we want to put guardrails on them? So we might have a key result to achieve a certain number of perhaps users to the software, but you might want to put some guardrails. We don't do that at any cost, and so there's lots of tips and tricks.
Okay, so could you give an example? So, for example, business saying make more money. Would that be a good example as an OKR?
It's a good start, and certainly we can work with that. So I would definitely say, well, okay, first of all, why do you want to why do you want to make more money? And is there any way that we can make the title a little bit more engaging? So it could be, we want to be the number one lending. Apologies, Emanuele, I'm going to forget your intro now. The number one software in wealth management or whatever it might be. And then the key result could be a pounds and pence outcome. And then we might also want to put some guardrails on. So again, we want to achieve this, but not at any cost.
Okay, great. And Emanuele, do you have anything to add around good OKRs?
No, I think I completely agree with what Kim is saying in terms of, the objective needs to be, we also use it to be a bit inspirational, but the key results needs to be measured, right? So you need to have some measurable key results. What worked well for us in my example, we started very recently to measure some engineering metrics in terms of deployment frequency or in terms of lead time, change failure ratio, and all of that. And, some of our key results around the success of our engineering team and be able to build the best engineering team in the world, it has key results based on how many deployments we do per week, for example, or how long we take to recover. So we say that we want to be less than, for example, 30 minutes to recover from an outage. And, if we achieve that, so our key result is be there or less. And, we have a measurable point. And I think that's really helpful also to motivate the team and to visualize why we want to be there. So I think that's the advice I would give. Yeah.
Okay. So could you go into what bad OKRs would look like then? Essentially, could you give an example? Going from the other mindset of what you've seen that has been inaccurate or and not a good OKR to set as a business.
It's I think anything which is quite the opposite, right? In a bit is not measurable, like very only qualitative. Sometimes being a bit fluffy, if you can give me the term, because at the end of the day, the great thing about OKR is also when you retrospect and you score them, right? And you understand what you achieved. And if it's up for debate or for interpretation, well, I'm not sure it will really serve the purpose to achieving that key result. So in my opinion, it really the key point is being measurable. And of course, for engineering in particular, one topic that's caused a lot of debate internally, but also with other CTOs I've been talking to, don't use OKR as an addition to get stuff on the product roadmap by bypassing that. So, as an OKR, we say we're doing this, this, and this, and that's like a 1-month project for a team. So my suggestion, don't do that, because otherwise the team will notice that when they start, and then they will lose the faith in the process, which is actually, as every process, has a great goal, but then if you use it badly, then you may fall out of the process, which actually the process is not the fault, but the fault is how you use it.
Okay, great. And Kim, anything to extend around bad OKRs?
Yeah, so when I first introduced OKRs to Ovo, I made every mistake in the book, so I had lots of bad examples. So I think to Emanuele's point about being measurable, you might have a wonderful, inspirational OKR with fantastic key results, but unless those key results, number one, are measurable, and number two, aren't hugely lagging, because we put in quite a lot that had massively lagging indicators on the key results, and the whole point is that we wanted our teams to be empowered and to experiment with things that would move the dial. But actually, if it's going to take a year before you can see if the dial's going to move, then that might not be the best thing to have as a key result. I certainly see quite a lot people, and in terms of cascade, I always say, look, start with, it has to be somewhat top down, and that you need to, as a leadership team, to kind of set out your vision and your overall OKR so that the teams can bottom up align. And quite often I see leadership teams going off on an offsite and spending loads of time and then coming up with OKRs that actually most of the team can't align to. And then it just feels slightly like, again, it's just going to, people won't buy into it if they can't see how it's going to affect their work. And obviously, I would say this because I run an OKR software platform, but making them transparent, making them part of the everyday rhythm of the organisation is absolutely key. To Emmanuel's point, if they are an additional thing to do, or they don't, you don't run your meetings around them, you don't refer to them, they're not transparent, they sit in a side deck in the CEO's inbox, then they're just not going to stick.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I do like that point about being able to see the dial move very quickly. Essentially, I've never had to think of it that way, but essentially you're absolutely right by having that verbalized there. That does like ding for me there. So the audience has already got 7 questions asked. So just before we dive into the audience's questions, let's just quickly carry on with one of mine because I'm in charge. Could you just give a short story essentially about how you guys have incorporated OKRs and how that has actually worked for you? So we'll start off with Emanuele first.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that, for example, I think every CTOs, right, think about their tech strategy. And by tech strategy, I mean, how do we implement things? It's not only what we build, but how we build it, right? And be like being massively scalable on the cloud or things like that. And you know, these are the things that usually don't necessarily agree with the product roadmap or don't get on the product roadmap. So one thing that we're doing at Moneyfarm, which I think has been working quite well, is that we use OKRs also as a tool to set key results on how we're doing things. So for example, right, you know, you have a monolith, like most of CTOs have to deal with monolith. And, you know, we want to say that actually, you know, we need to start tackling down the monolith. And we say that every new feature we're building as a key result is every new feature we're building, it's not going on the monolith. That's measurable in a binary way, but I'm using that also to give the team the motivation, say, well, actually, we don't want the monolith and we want to get rid of it. But while maybe I cannot put on this quarter on the roadmap to actively tackle a piece of it, we're saying as a key result, everything new we're doing is not going there. Or, you know, like fix the load testing for this endpoint, right? We're saying this load testing for this endpoint has to go that way. One thing that actually I think it's been working good for us, and sorry, my video sometimes it goes up and down. I don't know why, I'm sorry. Never happened to me on other tools. But one thing that's worked for us is really to reflect on the product roadmap and then accordingly say, okay, so we're working on this area of the platform, on this area of the platform, and then build key results around our non-functional requirements on those areas of the platform. So using the roadmap really as a background in order to get key results that we know we can achieve. Because if we set key results on a specific part of the platform and we know we're working on it, I'm not suffering from the problem I described before, in which I say, well, I want to do this, and then, but it's not on the roadmap, and then when you're going to get time for it. So it's really guiding us how to do things. So really like seeing for us what worked, OKR as a way to describe how we do things and not only what we do. So that really worked for us, I have to say.
Okay, great. And Kim, I'd love to hear a story from you as well.
So when I'll use one of my clients because she's actually doing it much better than I did it when I was with Ovo. So we work with Deloitte in lots of different practices. One of our clients is Deloitte Ventures, which is the, I guess, investment and also looking at kind of new emerging technologies, essentially. So there's about 300 guys there, and they all use OKRs. And I think what they do really well, so they do the top-down versus bottom-up alignment really well. So the leadership team set out their overall strategic direction and the overall priorities for that particular practice, and then bottom up, the cross-functional teams come together and say, well, look, what do we want to achieve, or where can we best fit in? And then they set their OKRs kind of bottom up. They're very good at differentiating between the metric outcomes as key results and then the initiatives that they hypothesize will achieve those key results. And the thing I've been really impressed with is the fact they run their meetings around OKRs. So instead of perhaps sitting in a meeting and saying, Internet of Things team, give me your update, or just having a generic kind of business update, instead they open Just 3 Things and they run their meetings. They saying, okay, let's start off by reviewing the things that are our priorities. Then let's start. Then let's look at the OKRs that aren't going as well, and talk about why they're not going so well and what can we do to help each other. So they're really, really focused on all their reporting, all their meetings being run around OKRs. So it's really part of their lifeblood now.
Okay, fantastic. So we've already got 9 questions in the question section and 2 questions from the chat section as well. So let's start touching on some of these. So the first one to pick out is how do you prevent people to work for their OKRs first before they help other colleagues with their unplanned tasks? So essentially, I can see this being quite a big issue where if you are using OKRs, you're prioritizing that above anything else in the business, including supporting your own team. Start off with Emanuele. What are your thoughts around that and how you can try and address that?
I think that's a very good question, because yes, people may tend to, depending on where they put OKRs in their priority values, they may tend to just look at that and ignoring anything else. Well, I don't have a 100% correct answer. What I think it's worth signaling is that we really need to understand why we're doing OKRs. And I know in the past, some companies I heard of, they tie OKR to kind of performance bonuses or, like financial compensation and all of that. I think that's really against what OKR should be used for. And, you will get a lot of that problem, because if I go to somebody and say, this is your OKR, and if you score 1 across all your key results, you get a bonus, of course, they're not going to do anything else, right? But that's not the purpose of the OKR. OKR is really a tool that's used to drive and to let us understand what we really care about. But having OKR is not a substitute for common sense in a way, right? It shouldn't be a key result that we are team worker. That's like how we live the business. And I think, company values may help on that. If you work in a company that has good values and people live by their values and abide by their values, you're less likely to have that. So I would probably argue that if you have a problem like that, the problem is not around OKR, it's about the company culture and how people see OKR. And that's something I would suggest to work on.
Okay. And Kim?
I think it's almost a nice problem to have, if that, in a weird way, because it means people are really taking their OKRs seriously and they're really focusing on them. Certainly making them transparent in any way. It could literally be kind of on a spreadsheet or some way of sharing OKRs, means that you have the context. So perhaps if a colleague is asking the team for some help, they have the context of what else they're working on right now, and perhaps they can say, well, look, I can help you, but I might mean that I missed this particular priority, or whatever it might be. So having everyone have their work transparently, I think is really, really, really key. And that doesn't have to be sophisticated. It literally can be on a Google sheet that you share around. And I also think I agree with Emanuele in terms of company culture being the kind of key component in this, rather than perhaps OKRs. But it might be a nice problem to have. Most companies I work with have the opposite problem, in that they set the OKRs and then they look at their workload and say, hang on a second, these have got nothing to do with each other.
Sure. So essentially, with that type of question, if I think the argument could also be made that maybe the OKRs aren't right if essentially there's not multiple people that are collated together to obviously achieve the key results. Essentially, if it is inside your own team and each individual has their own separated key results that aren't aligned with each other, I can imagine an issue cropping up in the same way there. Just to carry on with this a little bit before I go to the next question from the audience, I'll just ask you, Emanuele. So with OKRs, there's normally the assumption that you should be trying to make them 50% achievable. So when you're calculating what the key results are supposed to be, the whole point is you're not supposed to be able to hit every single one. The whole point is obviously they get stronger as you go closer to the deadline, but they're not supposed to be guaranteed. That's why you shouldn't be basing them on bonuses, why you shouldn't be basing them on your team's ability to actually be able to deliver. What are your thoughts? Do you think that's a fair comparison, or do you think in a different way?
So I think, well, 50%, to be honest, I'm not really sure whether I would say 50% achievable or not. I think key results are there, and it's also a tool for for leadership in the organization to kind of stretch the team, right? We could say that some companies may put OKRs, may put key results for an objective in such a way that if you achieve everything, you hit your stretch goal. And I may use that as a leader of an organization to inspire my team and say, well, actually, if we do this, we are really, really, really good. And that's fine. Now, I think the important point is to be clear on how you're going to score those OKR, because some companies may think, actually, we need to do all of this. And that's fine, provided that, as Kim was talking a lot about transparency, which I think is the key here. If we are transparent with our people and we say, actually, this is the objectives, these are the key results, we agreed with you, so we all know that this is going to take the company to the direction it needs to go, and we're going to be happy if we do all of them, or we're going to be happy if we do 70% of them. And then if we do 100%, well, we're doing extremely well. I think it's key here. I like the idea of using key results as a stretch to the team. So actually, let's push the bar higher and higher and higher. But provided we are clear with the team and we're not expecting 100%, it's not that if we hit 50% or 70%, there's going to be repercussion. No, it's not that. It's just like, this is really a tool to allow us to focus and know what we're working on. And I think using that as a push, as a motivational, well, it adds some flavor to one of the goals of the OKR. So yes, that's what I think on that.
Yeah, I think interestingly, at OVO, I started off trying to use the 70% rule because I'd read John Doerr's books and the I guess the accepted wisdom of OKRs is the kind of 70%, 50%, and it just didn't work for us. It really didn't. It made people really stressed out because they thought, as to Emanuele's point, oh my goodness, I'm expected to hit this thing and it looks impossible, so I'm not even going to try. And also, I think there was a real problem with consistency. So some of our areas were very comfortable. So typically the product tech areas were very, very comfortable with the 70%. And then trying to get the finance team, first of all, to work cross-functionally, and secondly, to set OKRs. They were like, well, we can't do that. We have to have numbers we can rely on. And because we had lack of consistency between departments, we actually all moved to 100% achievable key results, just so that everybody was super clear about what they almost could rely on other teams to deliver, rather than it being this, it could be 50%, it could be 70%, who knows?
Okay. Yeah, I've never worked in an organization with 100% achievable so far. So it's interesting. I can completely see the financial reason behind that, for that consistency, to be able to plan your budget, what your expectations are for each year. But that's a really interesting point of view. So from the audience question, next one that's highest voted is, we'll start with you, Kim. How do you think about OKRs for managers?
So OKRs for managers in terms of...
It could go in either way. It could either be OKRs against the managers, or how managers assume OKRs, how managers should be contributing to producing the OKRs. I would assume against the managers would be what this question is relating to. So what should a manager's OKR be?
So it's interesting. I mean, I typically encourage people just to set OKRs down to the team level. I think that there's something around encouraging the team to feel they're all in it together, trying to go back to the difference between this kind of outcome and output. So trying to get the team to think a little bit more in hypotheses and experiments, and think, what can we do to achieve this outcome? So I probably wouldn't advise an individual manager has individual key results, individual OKRs, that they're part of the team's OKRs. And then, of course, and Emanuele will be much more experienced in this, being a CTO, but for me, managers should be coaches. So they shouldn't really have their own deliverables. They should be coaching their people to achieve the business goals, rather than focusing on hitting their own. And that's another reason why I couldn't agree more not to link OKRs to bonus or compensation.
Okay. Anything to add, Emanuele?
No, I totally agree with Kim when she says that a manager, should be coaches, right? So my responsibility, as I see, is to make sure my team can reach the key results. And my role is to enable the team to reach the key results by removing the blocker and by making sure that organizational structure is aligned to let us achieve those goals. So yes, we don't, in Moneyfarm, we don't set a list in tech team OKRs for people. We set them for the wider technology department. We may think of going into the single cross-functional team, but we're not doing that right now. For managers, really, like for me, what I expect from the managers of my department is to enable the team to do that. And I wouldn't then say, oh, you have to, I don't know, like hire the X number of people or things like this. I don't think that would add really value. And I think it would be just a tick boxing exercise rather than really setting OKR in the direction, which is improving the business.
Okay, sure. So essentially, if the mindset then is that you have multiple OKRs inside your organization and they ever only go down to a team level, obviously there could be multiple OKRs set across your entire business as one. So one of the audience questions, which sort of ties into that piece there, is how do you handle certain department OKRs that are relying on other departments' work who might have set different OKRs? So if there's dependencies between two teams with different OKR sets. Start off with Kim.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really common, I think, is the first thing to say, particularly when people are first starting out with OKRs. I mean, in Over, we had all sorts of examples of, we had one where the marketing department was going to launch a big kind of PR campaign and big kind of above the line advertising, and they were completely that was almost putting against the contact center, which was trying to reduce the number of calls coming in. And so by doing this advertising campaign, that's going to shoot the calls up, and yet these guys were trying to get the calls down. So we had loads of examples of where departments were almost putting against each other, and obviously lots of examples of where one department couldn't do this without the other department. So it's really common, and I think a lot of it is surfaced through transparency. So again, it doesn't have to be on anything fancy. It can, if we were in the office, it could be on the wall. But that's the idea of at least those dependencies or misalignments are surfaced. And then they can actually be discussed, which is a great starter for 10. And then I think it's around trying to, obviously, again, culture's really key, but have those conversations to say, look, we both can't do these two things because they literally pull against each other. Let's now look at the business and the overall strategy and say, well, what's the most important thing?
Okay, so it's a top level down discussion against conflicting OKRs amongst departments to determine if the OKR should be amended to obviously match what the actual business level OKRs would be against the team levels. That's the way we're going towards there.
Yeah, okay. The idea of kind of bottom up alignment of OKRs, it's a really romantic idea because it's all about empowerment and the teams kind of declaring what they want to do. But I think it really means you're doing OKRs in a vacuum. There's got to be an overall kind of business strategy and strategic direction, and then ideally leadership level, big OKRs shared together as a leadership team, and then everyone else can take from that, and then they can be empowered and everything else. But without that, you're never going to decide these issues of misalignment. Okay,
great. Emanuele, anything to add for that?
Well, no, not really. I mean, Kim, I think she's done a great job at describing. I think it's important, very important, to align on the company goals. And, without company goals, it's very difficult to set OKRs full stop because you don't know what objectives you're trying to achieve. As a tech team, how do I know what I need to achieve if I don't know where the business is going, right? That's very, and, interdependencies between teams. I do have that with product, for example, because my OKR may depend on product a lot because depending on the roadmap, and that's where we have communication and we have exchange of opinion and we all try to be on the same page. I think that if you do this exercise well of understanding where the company is going, what's the strategy of the company for the next 24 months, and then distill OKRs from that, you will have very little conflicts because it will be very unlikely that you have conflict if you're following that. And when you have them, or maybe it's a matter of, hey, I have an objective or a key result that requires another department, talk to the head of the other department first. What we do in Moneyfarm is OKRs is an iterative process. So we think about our OKRs as a team, and then we, as a leadership group, as an executive group, we share all together and we discuss about them to make sure we have alignment. And then we go and we do our changes. before announcing them to the wide organization. So there's a lot of communication because, I mean, business is a team sport anyway, and even each one of us has the direction. We need to make sure that we all travel in the same direction.
I think as well, just add to that, it's really important to think about the cadence and the timing. I see quite a lot of companies who want to set quarterly OKRs, which is great, and we really encourage that. But almost the top level business OKRs, they really need to be annual, because otherwise you're kind of leaping from kind of quarter to quarter, and it's all very frantic. I think setting quarterly OKRs at the team level, absolutely, that's perfect. But ideally, the business strategy ones need to be annual.
Okay, great. So that actually does lead really nice into the next question. So essentially, we'll start off with you, Emanuele, here. So how do you avoid having OKRs just equal to the roadmap, so your backlog items? So how many OKRs do you suggest you have within like a time period, and what is the possible OKR structure?
So, well, how do you avoid that is making sure that when you review your OKRs, you're not overlapping the roadmap, right? Because, I mean, for me, for my team, I know delivering the roadmap is not a discussion, right? One of the main duties of my team is to deliver the product roadmap. And that's it. So it's pointless for me to put on the OKR, we deliver the roadmap, because, hey, it's like kind of intrinsic. So what we do there is to make sure, of course, that everything we measure, as I was saying before, is key results around how we do things. In particular, there's some technical stuff that we know needs to be done, and we know it's compatible to the scope of the roadmap, right? It's the usual thing like, maybe I cannot have time to touch a new area of the business, of the platform, if I don't have it on the roadmap. But if I'm touching an area in the roadmap, I know I can make some key results about making it better. So, for example, I change a part of the platform that goes on the legacy architecture. As a key result, I then put that, X amount of calls to the legacy systems are not there anymore. And that's very measurable, and that's achievable because it just specifies how we're working on the system. Regarding how many, well, I think in technology so far, we are in the process in Moneyfarm to reviewing OKR for this quarter. We do quarterly. And I think we have 4 objectives. And Kim before said every objective having 3 to 4 key results. Yes, we're following that rule. I think mostly it's 3 key results per objective. Some of them we set it as incremental. So, you will achieve this, and you can achieve that, and you can achieve that. Some of them are more like independent between each other, because, for example, we can have an objective about simplification, and maybe we have like few initiatives in parallel that we can achieve, but doing one doesn't mean that we will achieve the other one. So and what I like, to be honest, I like one-pagers. I think they sit very well with people's mind. So if you can set everything in one page, of course, without the font size at 8, that's perfect. So otherwise it becomes too broad. And OKR, you need to reinforce them to the team. They need to keep them in their mind. And more than one page, you start to have too much cognitive load, and then you can easily forget about them.
Great. Kim, anything to add? Because the next question is going to direct to you, and it's very related to the organizational aspect anyway. So if we just move straight on to that one, actually, I think. So what would you say would be the best practice you've seen recommended for setting OKRs in the wider context of the organization? So these are things like sign-offs, alignment, validation, and overlap.
Yeah, so I think that to Emanuele's point of starting with the leadership team is really, really key. So first of all, getting the buy-in of the leadership team to the concepts that we're trying to achieve, or why are we doing OKRs? Is it because we want to be more focused? Is it because we want to be more aligned? Is it because we want to encourage our teams to be more hypothesis-led and innovative? So really understanding the why. And then starting off with the leadership team to really nail down a set of OKRs that are relevant to the teams, that are that feel like the language is inspirational. For me, it's really important that they're prioritised. They don't have to be kind of stack ranked, but at least for the leadership team to say, look, these are the big rocks that we have to achieve this year, and then everyone is on the same page. And then in terms of once you've got kind of sign off at that level, I would then say that it's around a cascade through the teams of teams, and then cross-functional teams. And for the sign off there, I mean, I see this varying hugely. Obviously, I think the fewer sign offs and gateways, the better. But there obviously needs to be some sort of feedback loops and circling back around and saying, are we focused on the right stuff? And again, making everything transparent is really, really, really important. So then we can start to say, well, actually, do we really need all of these sign-offs, particularly if it's a hierarchical type sign-off, if everything is transparent? And if everyone can see what everyone else is working on, then surely we don't need to kind of have so much rigor in the way that things are signed off. So, of course, I work with a lot of clients in the financial sector, and of course there are procedures and so forth to follow. But I really try to, particularly if you're setting OKRs quarterly, what we don't want to do is to spend so long getting sign off that it's almost the next quarter.
Absolutely. And Emanuele, anything to add around the organizational process of approving OKRs?
One thing that Kim said that I strongly agree with is the fact that we need to understand why we're doing OKRs, right? And I think once you really understand why a company is doing OKRs, things are already going in the right direction. Because I worked in the past, or I heard some people saying they're doing OKRs, but without even knowing what they're doing, that just as a cargo cult, right? Because it's so popular and Silicon Valley, everybody does it. That's really, you will feel the pain if you do it like that.
Sure. Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. So staying with you, Emanuele, then. So this is more of a direct question. So what are the examples of good OKRs for like new or novel businesses? People find OKRs easy to invent for stable, established businesses, but can you compare BAU and extrapolate? So for startups, it's much harder. So for a new business that's very new, hasn't got as much history, doesn't maybe know exactly how it wants to scale, I would assume maybe that's what they're sort of leaning at. What would you recommend as examples for OKRs in this type of scenario?
Well, when I started setting OKRs for Moneyfarm, we were already kind of an established scenario. But what we did with something a bit more novel was about the metrics, right? So we started taking metrics not that long ago in terms of engineering metrics. What we did is really trying to observe a bit and then set a trend line and say, well, we're doing this if we're better than that. And, let's say that you start the quarter here, we want to end the quarter here. So this is something we try. And it's a bit the challenge when you're building a business plan as well. Like, how do you know what numbers are you going to put there if you don't know much about it? So I think, to be honest, I would really, first of all, be aspirational, as we said, but also then look at what you have so far, even if it's just some data point, and then start building on the trend before you can understand really what you really should aim for. So I hope that answered the question. I haven't experienced that situation firsthand anyway, so maybe I don't know if Kim has something else to add on new businesses.
Well, I use OKRs with my team, and we're a startup, so there's 11 of us, and I think what's been really helpful for my guys is just for me to be super clear on the number one priority. So for us, it's weekly active users, and everything else can come second. So revenue, everything else comes second. Weekly active users, that's the one I care about the most. That's the one I want to, and so therefore everything we do in the product should be about weekly active users, or it should be about that before it is about anything else. So making sure people love it, and of course we balance that with weekly active users, and then the Sean Ellis kind of product sentiment type measures, because there's no point in people being nudged to come in and then hating it. But I think that I don't know where we're going to be next year. I have literally no idea. I don't know if we're going to go through another fundraise. I don't know what the Corona situation is going to be, but I do know that's the most important thing to me, and it will remain the most important thing to me, is having happy active users. So I think even in uncertainty, picking the priorities that aren't going to change, and communicating those again and again and again has worked for my little team.
Okay, so switching it around from the other side for a more established business. So if I give the example of a business that's been running for 5 years, has had really good success at retaining customers, so doesn't think about it, builds a load of OKRs about onboarding new customers, but obviously this might include lots of features, and then suddenly they then start seeing negative results inside their business because the retaining users now moves down because too many new features, can't understand it, and moving away. What does an organization do in that situation when they realize that their OKRs are not actually the correct ones for the business because they haven't considered things that have just been successful naturally for them? Kim, to start with?
So I quite often I get asked a very similar question. So what's a KPI? What's an OKR? And I often use the typical example, I think it might be John Doerr, who talks about KPIs. Imagine going to the doctor and they take your blood pressure and they you look at your heart rate and do your BMI or et cetera, and those are all KPIs. Those are things that you want to keep an eye on. But say I go to the doctor and my blood pressure's high, so all of a sudden I want to flip that over into an OKR because I now want to actively change something. So OKRs should be the things that you're actively trying to change, and everything else is the things you're monitoring. You want to keep an eye on them, and if one of them suddenly becomes out of sync, so in your example, all of a sudden the users aren't happy, then of course instantly, don't wait till the end of the quarter. OKRs should be kind of living, breathing things, flip that over into an OKR, and we focus the teams onto what can we do about this.
Okay, great. So you actually amend a live OKR because of important KPI metrics that's now changed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think, if you say Moneyfarm all of a sudden had a big problem that the site went down, everybody would swarm on that. And it's the same. If you've got a KPI that's kind of really giving you danger signs, there's no reason that you should wait, unless of course you're, Emanuele's much more experienced about product roadmap than I am, but for me, that's why I try to keep, particularly as a startup, I try to keep my roadmap quite short at any one time, so that if we do need to bring something in, we can reprioritize our work.
Excellent. Okay then, and Emanuele, so just becoming a little bit more abstract then. So do you believe that OKRs can work well within just one function, or do they actually always need to be implemented across the company wide?
I think they have to be implemented top down for sure. So if you cannot have only OKR for tech, for example, I'm talking tech because this is my department, I think, without having clear company objectives, right? Because otherwise you may introduce just a friction point there, because, well, tech is working on this objective, but what are the company objectives, right? I think maybe if you're trialing it, but Kim, maybe I have more experience, if you're trialing it with a small group just to trial to see if it fits, if it works for you, that could be. But once you're implementing them, on an ongoing basis, I think every team has to do that, because it's also a matter of transparency, right? We want everybody to be transparent, and there will be endless conversation. Probably tech team has OKR, but the finance team doesn't. And it's like, well, why don't they have OKR? Why? What are they working on? Because this also becomes a statement of work, right? It's like, well, we're actually doing this, and this is here, and everybody in the company can see that. Go to that folder in the shared drive and see what everybody's working on. But tech sometimes, I used to remember a lot saying, listening to colleagues from other parts of the businesses, well, yes, okay, this is all great, but what are you doing, guys? What are you doing, people? Like, what you're working on? And OKR is a great way to say, actually, well, apart from the roadmap, this is our key results, and we're working to achieve that. So I would say, yes, you need every part of the business to have that, to do it properly.
Great. Okay then, so Kim, this is probably a good one for you to start with. Are there any of the accelerate metrics good for key results, or does Goodhart's law come into play? So could you start off with Goodhart's law, explain that a little bit to me, and then go into accelerate metrics for key results?
I would love to, Glyn, but I don't know what Goodhart's law is.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I was hoping you would either. I'll sit there going, what's that? Okay, I'll have a little Google and I'll come back to that one in a second. So when, okay, so I tell you, we'll move on to the next one. We'll come back to that one. So when rolling out OKRs into an organization, what do you find is the right depth of an objective should be? So obviously, we've already discussed that individuals shouldn't have individual objectives, but at an organization level, what level should it go to, would you say? Essentially, how detailed should you be with your actual objectives?
Somebody just put on message what they...
Oh, they've already done it, have they? John Topper's jumped in. He always saves the day. When measuring becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of how detailed to go, so I think again, it just completely depends on the context that you're working in. I think what's really important is, what was important to me at OVO, and Emanuele might disagree with this, was to make the objectives inspirational but achievable. So having these kind of complete moonshots, it's okay to have one or two of them, but if people look at the company strategy and think, we're never going to get there, what on earth are these guys thinking in their ivory tower? How am I going to be able to contribute to that? I think that's so they need to be detailed enough at the top level that people feel they can achieve. And then I personally would go down to the team level, so probably one lower than Emanuele has currently in Moneyfarm. So I'd go down to the cross-functional product teams. I would also really encourage, obviously, the product and the tech team as a kind of entity to really set those together. So to set it as the cross-functional product team, not by department. And then I probably would stop there. So I wouldn't go down to individual level.
Okay, excellent. Anything to add on that, Emanuele?
No, I think I totally agree with what Kim said. Yes, we're doing it only at team level. I think for product engineering teams right now, we more rely on KPI and making sure that we can evaluate the impact the product engineering team had on the KPI. But we are stopping at team level, wider team level.
Okay then. And just going back to the one about Goodhart's law then. So are any of the accelerant metrics good for key results? So I'm trying to think of an example here that's going to be relevant. So essentially, if when measuring becomes a target ceases to be a good measure, trying to think of an example of that where it's not actually providing what you want as a business. Can you think of one off the top of your head, Emanuele?
I cannot think of one to point about. I can elaborate a bit more because the message now that Bob just wrote and track cycle time in an engineering team, that becomes a key result to reduce it to X. What we're doing at Moneyfarm, we do have something as a key result. It's more about like reliability, but for things like cycle time, my key result usually would be like to do better than the quarter before. Because, at a certain point, like this is very difficult to say, well, it needs to be 3 days, it needs to be 4 days, because it depends on a lot of things. But what I want to achieve with that is to have the team continuously improve on that and continuously work on that. So what we are doing here that's been, I think it's working so far for us, is really saying, okay, we've done this quarter, now let's do better. And I know this is measurable in terms like, yes, you've done better or not, you haven't done better. So it's not an exact target. But we're using that in order to motivate also people to kind of think about how they work and improve that. But setting a number there for cycle time, I think, yes, it's very, I don't know, setting a number for a key result. I can understand how it can be controversial, to be honest. Okay. You're using this in order to encourage people behavior, right? You're using metrics in order to trigger the right behaviors. You're not using metrics for the sake of having the number.
Absolutely. And it could be the same thing for, deployability time, how many times you deploy a day. Essentially, just because you can deploy 8 times a day doesn't mean there's value behind that if you're not producing value on each individual deployment, for example. So, yeah, exactly. It makes sense. Okay, then. So I'll tell you what, this is the one that I saw that I want to pick out that I think would be really useful just to do it. So essentially, just to answer this one first, then Kim. So if OKRs are not roadmap related, and if achieving them doesn't give you any direct benefit, why would one be motivated to care about them in the first place? So this would be like probably selling the reasons for OKRs into a CEO or the manager of your business.
So for me, I think they should be roadmap related, but almost kind of at the next level up, if that makes sense. So they should give you the why. Why are you working on this in the roadmap? So if you're releasing a particular feature, why are you releasing that feature? It's usually in order to achieve a particular outcome. Of course, the individual kind of feature, or whatever it might be, roadmap item will have its own success criteria. But that and I see all the time. I even see in my own team that we use ShapeUp, the Basecamp methodology, and we'll release a feature and everyone will celebrate. And I'll say, okay, that's great, and well done, guys. That looks amazing. What I really care about is, has it increased our usership? Do people do people really love this feature? Because that's the success criteria for the roadmap item. It's more, but has it driven the behavior we wanted? And it gives you that link as to the why. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, it isn't just a complete separation between output. It is the fact that you're focusing on the outcome, but obviously the output is related to the outcome in these circumstances.
Yes.
Great. Okay, then. So for Manuel, so this would be a bit more like team structures. So using KPIs, OKRs, sprints all together, is that overkill for engineering product teams, or do you have you seen them actually sync quite well together?
I think yes, they've been working quite well together. You know, it really depends because, you know, sprint meetings, right? If you're doing Scrum and all of that, you can do as a heavyweight as you want. Of course, I believe that process is good, but just enough process, right? So we want to be agile. And at the same time, for OKRs, I mean, in my experience, I work with OKRs with my team, but not with every level of the team, right? So, you know, there's some levels like the engineering managers, for example. I work with OKRs with my engineering managers. It's part of their job to make sure that they're aligned on this kind of process. And I think, you know, we try to avoid the team at the cross-functional team. In our case, we don't do OKRs with them, but I keep that the level higher so we have a shared vision of technology, what we want to achieve and what our key results. KPIs are really an indicator that help, in my experience, they help the product owners to prioritize the roadmap, right? And like, I want to hit that KPI target. I need to improve that metric, so I work on that. It works well. I can understand why some people may think it's a bit too heavy, but the reality is, I think you need to adapt, and you know, like you need to find what's working. Like Scrum or Agile in general, right? Is not one size fits all. Every company has to do it in a different way to get the principle right. And it's not because it's Scrum you need to have the planning and the grooming and the retro is important, but all of that you need to tailor to the team. So no, I don't think it's too much. I see it working quite well.
So they can complement each other with you focusing on the actual key results instead of what would normally be roadmap items. Okay, great. Yes. And for Kim then, so what would you say are the criteria for an outcome versus an output? How can you coach someone in changing their mindset from outputs in towards outcomes?
Yeah. So I actually started my career as a business psychologist and occupational psychologist, and I spent 7 years coaching individuals using basically, I didn't know what OKRs were, but using similar kind of method to OKRs in terms of outcomes and outputs. So the typical, I'm just going to pluck an example out of thin air. So I did personal coaching. So I might have I was working with a law firm doing a program for female partners, and the typical thing that people would come to me with was, I want to be able to feel more confident in meetings, typically they then say, right, okay, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to go on a course, I'm going to whatever it might be. And I'd say, how does that? Let's just slow down. That's output. That's the things you're going to do in order to feel more confident. Let's just stop and think, in 6 months' time, if you feel more confident, what does that feel like? What does that look like? How is it evidenced to other people? And they might say, well, I speak up in every meeting I go to. And we say, great, so that is an outcome. So what we want to do is the outcome is to speak out in every meeting. Now we go back to, how do we think we're going to get there? So let's and again, trying to think of this in hypotheses. So I hypothesize that by reading this book is going to help me. Let's read the first chapter. And is it helping? No? Fine. On to the next thing. Let's look at that. So I think when people are kind of listing out a whole list, a to-do list, that's most definitely output. It's just, release this feature, do this thing, do this project. And it's saying, well, why are you doing it? What is the business value you're going to create? What does success look like? And then go back to and now how do you think you're going to get there? Sorry, that was a really long one.
And Emanuele, do you guys have any other points to raise?
Nope. Not on this one.
Okay, great. So, I'm just trying to go for the last few questions from the audience. None of my questions are getting answered. Everyone's asking their own. So that's great. Essentially, I don't need to prepare as much as I have done. So as the last question from the audience, before we start just discussing around how to measure and the tooling around it, you mentioned lead time and mean time to recovery. What other engineering metrics do you actually recommend? What is, in your opinion, the best metric for engineering productivity? So in other words, trying to convert these OKRs towards engineering productivity, which obviously we don't want to do at an individual level, but obviously at a team level we could do. What are your thoughts around this?
Well, you mentioned, or somebody from the audience mentioned the Accelerate book. I recommend reading that book to everybody because it's a great book that tells you about engineering metrics and the correlation that those metrics have to high-performing teams. I think really defining the metrics that you need to think what's the function of engineering. For me, engineering really needs to deliver great features for our customers and keep the platform stable and reliable, right? And that's why you're talking about deployment frequency, because you think how many times you're delivering software to production, which in turns means how many times you're adding value to your customer, right? Because there's a correlation between release and adding value to the customer. So I think really before defining metrics for productivity, you have to think, what do you want to achieve? What are the behavior you want to reward in a way? Because if I'm saying that I want to keep a short lead time and I want to increase and I want to release often, means I really care about delivering or shipping small increments of software live. And that's why I put some metrics there in order to track the behavior. So what we're doing really in Moneyfarm, we are adapting the metrics from Accelerate and really talking about deployment frequency and change failure ratio and all of that. So I would recommend to read that book because it's amazing. And then, of course, the hard part is implementing that because it's quite tricky to do it, in real world, making sure that you measure everything. But I really think about what you want the behaviors you want to promote, and then what metrics can help lead in the organization towards implementing those behaviors.
Great. And Kim, any recommended reading material, tools to use for implementing OKRs into organizations?
So, I mean, lots of people read the John Doerr book. I do like it, but I don't agree with all of it. I don't agree. He talks about the fact that key results can be milestones. So, deliver this project or deliver this thing. And I disagree with that a little bit. I like Philippe Castro, who writes a lot about OKRs. He's very controversial, and he's funny. So he's good. So his blog is really good.
Excellent. I mean, for me, I've read Radical Focus, which was an excellent book on OKRs. I gave it to my CEO, who then used it to keep her desk lamp stable. So I think her focus wasn't really there for that. But it's a nice point. And then essentially just around measuring, just before we tie it up then. So the final thing is obviously, depending on how we do it, are there any recommendations for tools or processes on how to measure effectively? Because we're saying we want clear outcomes with outcomes with the KPI, with the actual key results. How do you measure that fairly inside an organization? Emanuele first.
Well, we have a pretty manual process, to be honest. We make sure that we synchronize on OKRs every quarter, and then it's up to the teams to make sure that we check on progress. So one thing that I found it always a bit tricky is making sure that people are on top of the OKRs and really remind what they are and working towards that. Reinforcing the message, maybe have a kind of a sync up meeting, not what Kim said before about business updates, but then just focus on the OKR, right? So saying, 1 month of the quarter is over, how do we are with that? What are we planning to do? A bit of a retrospective in a way. I think that worked for us. I don't have any other more structured approach to offer.
Okay. And Kim, anything else to add around measurements around the key results?
I think wherever possible, and I'm going to really try not to flog my software here because that would be the worst possible thing that I could do. But whatever software, obviously I think that it's useful to have some sort of software. Doesn't have to be just 3 things. There's lots of others available. And then making sure, taking the time to link the data sources from the business into the software and automating the updates, I think is really worthwhile. Because then, number one, it becomes this kind of source of truth that everybody can kind of go in and see transparently what's happening. And secondly, then you've got the teams really focused on checking in and commenting and saying, this is why we think that the metric's gone up or you've gone down, but they don't have to spend ages digging around for the actual measurement. And quite a lot of our clients, that's one of their favourite things about using software. It's just the idea that you can just pull in different data sources into one place and have this kind of thing that everyone can look at.
Okay, sounds excellent. Okay, so we should probably round it up there. We are at 59 minutes, so perfect timing, guys. So it's been excellent to be with us today. So thank you very much, Emanuele and Kim, for taking the time to talk with us today. It's been a pleasure. You can connect with all the speakers from the social information I've just shared on the chat, so you guys can reach out to them to their LinkedIn, their websites, and their Twitters through there. And that's everything. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. So thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.